My proposed solution would reduce operating costs by... She stopped, exhaled, started again. My proposed solution would reduce operating costs by 31% in the first fiscal quarter, while simultaneously, her voice dropped to almost nothing before the sentence was finished. She pressed her thumb hard against the edge of the paper, closed her eyes for 3 full seconds, and then opened them again. The page hadn't changed. The cafe was not empty. It never was at 7:40 in the morning. Behind the counter, the espresso machine ran in short, confident bursts. 2 men in construction jackets were sharing a folded newspaper at the booth nearest the door, reading in companionable silence. A woman in nursing scrubs sat 2 tables over, staring at her phone with the specific, battered focus of someone who had just survived a 12-hour night shift and was still figuring out how to be a human being again. A teenager near the window had his backpack open and his eyes closed, possibly asleep, possibly just done with the morning already. Nobody was listening to Zara Coleman, or so she believed. She was 23 years old. She was seated at a corner table in the Meridian Cup Café on the south side of Columbus, Ohio, with 3 carefully printed pages laid out in front of her, a highlighter that had surrendered its ink 2/3 of the way through the 3rd paragraph, and a bottle of water she had quietly refilled twice at the counter because she could not afford coffee this morning. The cafe had a loosely enforced policy about occupying tables without purchasing something. She had asked the barista, a patient, soft-spoken young man named Ben, who wore a small enamel pin of a coffee cup with a lightning bolt through it, whether water counted as a purchase. He had said yes, and smiled in the way people smile when they understand exactly what the question is really asking, and want the person asking it to know that they're welcome anyway. She had thanked him and chosen the corner table because it was the furthest from the door, and the furthest from the door meant the least foot traffic, and the least foot traffic meant she could whisper to herself without anyone deciding she was a problem. The presentation was in 4 hours. She had been awake for 22. The pages in front of her were the product of 6 weeks of work she had not been paid for, had not been asked to do in quite this scope, and had completed entirely on borrowed time and borrowed equipment. The assignment had come as part of the final stage of her internship application to Crestline Solutions, one of the fastest-growing supply chain management companies in the Midwest, with distribution operations across 7 states, and a reputation for hiring people who were, in the words of their website, rigorous problem solvers who understand that the floor and the boardroom are 2 parts of the same conversation. She had read that sentence 4 times before applying. They had given her the assignment without asking whether she had the tools to complete it. She had completed it without telling them she didn't. She had borrowed her neighbor Mrs. Weston's laptop every evening for 3 weeks, carrying it carefully up 2 flights of stairs and carrying it just as carefully back down each night before midnight, because Mrs. Weston needed it for her early shift the next morning. She had used the Columbus Public Library's printer, paying per page, planning her print runs so she only had to go 3 times. She had walked 40 minutes each way to visit the Crestline distribution facility in Hilliard because she couldn't afford the rideshare fare, and the bus route terminated 6 blocks short of the facility entrance. She had walked the 6 blocks both times, in October, in the rain the second time. The analysis was 22 pages long. She had been told she would have 8 minutes to present it. She had spent 11 days deciding which 8 minutes of material those 22 pages contained. The bottleneck occurs at the outbound sorting stage, she whispered, trying again, her voice so quiet it barely made it past her own lips. Not at receiving, as current management has assumed. I identified a 17-minute average delay between... You're rushing the numbers! Zara's head came up. The voice had arrived without warning, warm, precise, and unhurried. It came from the table diagonally across from hers, not immediately adjacent, but close enough that in the quiet of the morning cafe, it had traveled without effort. A woman sat there. She had not been there when Zara arrived, or she had been there, and Zara had been too focused on her pages to register her. She appeared to be in her early 50s. She wore a dark blazer over a simple grey shirt, both of which were the kind of clothing that cost considerably more than they announced. Reading glasses had been pushed up into silver-streaked natural hair that was pinned loosely at the back. There was a cup of black coffee in front of her and an open laptop to one side, though the screen was angled away. A leather notebook sat closed beside the laptop, a pen resting across it. She was looking at Zara with the calm, full attention of someone who had asked one question and was now simply waiting for it to arrive. "I'm sorry?" Zara said. "The numbers," the woman said. 31%, 17 minutes. You're saying them faster than everything else, as if you're trying to get past them before someone notices. Zara glanced around the cafe. The men with the newspaper hadn't looked up. The nurse was still on her phone. Ben was wiping the counter. Nobody had registered the exchange. "I'm practicing for a presentation," Zara said. "I know." The woman lifted her coffee. "I've been listening for about 12 minutes. The heat that came into Zara's face was immediate. Was I speaking too loudly? No. I have very good hearing. A brief pause. "And I'm curious about the bottleneck. Before we go any further into Zara's story, take 1 second right now. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. We are American Truth Tales, and I genuinely want to know how far these stories reach." The woman's name, Zara did not know. She would not know it for another 43 minutes. What she did know, within the first 5 minutes of conversation, was that this woman asked questions the way a surgeon made incisions. Precisely, without waste, and in exactly the location most likely to reveal what was underneath. "Tell me about the bottleneck," the woman said, as if continuing a conversation they had already been having. Zara looked at her pages. Something about the woman's tone made the rehearsed version feel wrong. The polished corporate language she'd spent 3 nights applying over the actual findings, like a coat of paint over cracked plaster. She set the paper down. "The outbound sorting stage," she said, speaking the way she thought when she was alone, not the way she'd been rehearsing. "The facility processes roughly 400 pallets per shift. The current system routes them by destination zip code, which sounds logical on paper. But 60% of the high-volume destinations share the same 3 loading corridors. During peak output hours, which run from roughly 1 to 4 in the afternoon, 2 of those 3 corridors are simultaneously handling inbound returns. The pallets queue. Workers have to manually reroute. The 17-minute delay isn't a workforce speed problem. It's a routing architecture problem. The workers aren't slow. The system is directing them to do 2 incompatible things in the same space at the same time." The woman was quiet for a moment. "How did you identify that? The architecture problem versus the workforce problem?" "I visited the facility." The woman's expression shifted slightly, something behind the eyes. "The one in Hilliard?" Zara paused. "Yes. How did you—" "Crestline only has 1 distribution center in the Columbus metro area." She said it without inflection. "Continue," Zara continued. Over the next 27 minutes, the woman asked 8 questions. Each one was short, each one targeted a different layer of the analysis, peeling away the presentation language until Zara was no longer reciting prepared material, but actually talking, explaining the mechanism of the problem the way she had come to understand it during those 2 rainy afternoons in Hilliard. Standing near the sorting floor with a notebook, watching the pallet queues form and dissolve and form again, with the rhythmic inevitability of a system that was never going to fix itself because nobody with the authority to fix it had stood in that spot long enough to see what she was seeing. "The timing data," the woman said. "How did you collect it?" "Manually. I tracked the pallet movement at 15-minute intervals over both visits. 4 hours total observation time. That's not a statistically significant sample." "No," Zara agreed. "That's why I cross-referenced it with 6 weeks of historical throughput records." "Crestline gave you access to their historical records?" "They gave me access to the summary reports as part of the assignment. The summary reports showed normal daily output, which is why the delay was invisible at the organizational level. I rebuilt the data hour by hour from the summaries." She paused. "It took a while." "I imagine it did." The woman looked at the pages on the table. "And the 31% reduction figure? If you reroute the high-volume destinations to a dedicated sorting corridor and shift the returns intake window by 90 minutes, not a full shift restructure, just 90 minutes, the corridor conflict disappears entirely during peak output hours. I modeled it against the 6 weeks of historical data with 3 different volume scenarios. 31% is the conservative estimate. What's the aggressive estimate? 44. The woman set down her coffee cup. For the first time, something crossed her face that Zara couldn't fully name. Not surprise, because this woman did not look like someone who was easily surprised. Something closer to the expression of a person who has been searching for a particular thing and has just found it in an unexpected location. "How old are you?" she said. 23. "Tell me about your background." Zara looked down at her water bottle. This was the question she had dreaded, the question behind all the other questions, the one that the panel would eventually arrive at, no matter how strong the analysis was, the one she had written and rewritten 17 different answers to, in the margins of her notes at 2 in the morning. "I'm finishing an associate's degree in supply chain operations at Columbus Community College, part-time." She paused. "I work the night shift at a fulfillment warehouse on the east side. I've been there for 2 years, third shift receiving supervisor for the last 8 months." The woman nodded slowly. "That's where you learn to read the floor." It was not a question. "Yes," Zara said. "What are you afraid the panel will ask you?" The question landed with unusual precision. Zara looked at her pages for a moment before answering. Why they should trust an analysis from someone without a 4-year degree, from someone who doesn't have the credential that usually comes attached to this kind of work. And what would you tell them? That the data is the data, that I validated every figure, that I visited the facility twice and tracked the problem manually before I modeled it, that the findings don't become less accurate because of where I go to school. She paused. That the bottleneck is real and it's costing them money, and the solution costs them nothing but a schedule adjustment. The woman picked up her coffee and held it without drinking from it. "Then say that," she said. "It sounds defensive." "It isn't defensive. It's direct. There is a significant difference, and you need to understand what it is before you walk into that room." She set the cup down. "Say it again." Zara said it again. The woman was silent for 8 full seconds after. "Better," she said. "Now say it without the pause before the words, 'where I go to school.'" "How did you know I paused?" "Because I was watching your face. That's where you stopped believing the sentence." Zara looked at her. "Who are you?" "Someone with a question about the staffing model in section 3. The woman opened the pages Zara had not offered her. She had apparently picked them up quietly during the moment the papers had been closest to her side of the table. "You proposed maintaining current headcount." "Why?" Zara let the deflection pass. "For now, because the delay isn't caused by insufficient labor. Adding workers to a routing architecture problem doesn't fix the architecture. It just gives you more people standing in a broken system. I modeled a staffing reduction scenario and a staffing increase scenario. Neither one moved the throughput numbers in a meaningful way. The only variable that moved them was the corridor schedule. What does management currently believe is causing the delay? Worker speed and absenteeism." Zara's voice stayed flat, but something underneath it did not. "The current performance review system flags individual workers when pallet processing times exceed a threshold. The workers are being evaluated against a standard that's physically impossible to meet during corridor conflict periods. So the records show a workforce performance problem. The records are measuring the wrong thing." The woman was very still. "You documented that." Pages 11 through 14. The woman turned to page 11. She read in silence for 90 seconds, which felt to Zara like considerably longer. When she looked up, something in her expression had changed in a way that Zara noticed, but could not yet interpret. "The workers whose records show the most performance flags," the woman said. "When do their shifts run?" "Peak hours, 1 to 4. When the corridors are most congested." "Yes." A pause. "The workers with the cleanest records. Morning shift, 6 to 9, before the returns volume starts." The woman set the pages down. She looked at Zara for a long moment, the specific look, Zara would later realize, of a person who has spent years evaluating other people's ability to see things clearly, and has just seen something they were not expecting. "And I want to stop here for just a moment, because I need you to understand what is happening at this corner table in Columbus, Ohio, at 8:15 in the morning. Zara Coleman has been awake for 22 hours. She borrowed a laptop to write this analysis. She walked in the rain to visit a warehouse twice. And right now, she is explaining to a stranger that the people being blamed for a problem didn't create the problem, and she has the data to prove it. Have you ever done work like that? Work that nobody asked for, that cost you time and energy you didn't have, because you could see something that mattered and you couldn't unsee it. At 8:49, Zara's phone buzzed against the table. She almost didn't look at it. She had been in the middle of walking the woman through Section 4, the realignment model, the one she was most uncertain about presenting, because it required the panel to follow a logic chain across 3 variables simultaneously, and she had been trying to figure out how to compress that chain into language that moved fast enough to hold attention, but slow enough to be understood. She looked at the phone. The notification was from a number she had saved as Crestline HR, Lauren M. The message was brief, a change to her interview schedule. The panel had been restructured due to an internal operations conflict. 2 of the 4 panel members had been pulled into an emergency meeting. The interview was being condensed. She would now have 4 minutes for her presentation. Not 8, 4 minutes. Zara set the phone face down on the table. The woman had seen her read the message. She waited without asking. "They cut my time in half," Zara said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that, distantly. For the presentation. 4 minutes now. She looked at the 22 pages. She had spent 11 days deciding what fit inside 8 minutes. "I don't know how to do this in 4. The woman was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "What is the single most important thing you found?" Zara didn't have to think. "That the delay isn't where they think it is." Say that in 1 sentence. The complete thought. The outbound sorting bottleneck is a routing problem, not a workforce problem, and fixing it doesn't require additional staff. It requires a 90-minute schedule adjustment. How much does that save? Conservatively, based on 6 weeks of validated data, $800,000 annually. The woman set down her coffee. She looked at Zara steadily. "That is your 4 minutes," she said. Zara stared at her. "That is 40 seconds. The other 3 minutes and 20 seconds belong to their questions, which will be better questions than anything on your slides because you'll have opened with the 1 sentence that makes them need to ask." She leaned forward slightly. "You are not there to present 22 pages. You are there to make them understand 1 thing so clearly that they cannot leave the room without knowing more. 1 sentence, 1 number. Then you wait." Zara sat with that. Something settled in her chest that had been unsettled for 11 days. "You know how these rooms work," she said. "I've spent some time in them. More than some time." The woman tilted her head in a way that was neither confirmation nor denial. Zara looked at her, really looked at her, with the same attention she had given the sorting floor in Hilliard, the same deliberate examination she had given to the summary reports that everyone else had accepted at face value. The blazer, the leather notebook, the laptop with no stickers, no branding, nothing that identified an employer. The way she spoke about Crestline's operations, not as an observer, but as someone who understood the internal geography of the company, the way you understand a building you have walked through many times, the way she had known the Hilliard facility existed without being told, the way she had asked about the historical records and known exactly what access a candidate would and wouldn't be given, the way she had read pages 11 through 14 of a 22-page analysis belonging to a stranger and understood immediately what she was looking at. "You're not a recruiter," Zara said. "No, you're not a hiring manager. No, you know this company." The woman picked up her coffee and held it without drinking from it. "Apply the same logic you applied to the throughput data," she said. "You're looking at information that doesn't match the surface explanation. What does it suggest?" Zara looked at her for a long moment. Someone who knows the Hilliard facility layout without being told. Someone who understands Crestline's internal reporting structure. Someone who knows how the interview panel is typically composed, because you use the word usually when I describe the panel, not normally or typically, which is what an outsider would say. Someone who asked about the staffing reduction model not out of curiosity, but out of the specific interest of someone who would have to implement it. She stopped. Someone who already knows whether my answer is right. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then the woman reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. She placed a business card on the table between them. Zara looked at it. The card was simple. No logo. No decorative design. Diane Ashworth, Chief Executive Officer, Crestline Solutions. The world did not tilt. The cafe did not go quiet. The espresso machine behind the counter ran another short burst, and Ben wiped the steam wand, and the men at the front booth turned a page of their newspaper, and everything continued at exactly the same pace it had been moving at for the last hour and 3 minutes. And yet, Zara did not move for 6 full seconds. You founded the company, she said. Yes. You run it. Yes. You have been sitting in this cafe for the past hour, asking me questions about my analysis of your company's operations. Yes. You were going to let me walk into that building at 11 o'clock without knowing any of this. Diane Ashworth looked at her without flinching. I was, until about 20 minutes ago. Zara felt something that occupied the space between anger and disbelief, and something she didn't quite have a name for yet. What changed 20 minutes ago? Diane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, it was with the precision of someone who has chosen the words carefully. Pages 11 through 14. The workers being measured against a standard designed to make them fail. You built the entire data model to prove it wasn't their fault before anyone asked you to. She set the card slightly closer to Zara's side of the table. I have been recruiting and evaluating people for this company for 11 years. That particular instinct, the one that looks at a system that has decided who the problem is and asks whether the system is correct, that instinct is not taught. You either have it or you don't. She held Zara's gaze. You have it, and you had it before I sat down. Zara looked at the card, then at the woman, then at the card. Was any of it real? She said. The schedule change, the condensed interview, completely real. Two of my operations directors are in an emergency meeting about a supplier contract that has been escalating since yesterday afternoon. The schedule adjustment was sent to you by Lauren in HR at 8:37. I didn't arrange it. I didn't know about it until my assistant messaged me while you were explaining the returns corridor. You came here to think. I do that sometimes. Different cafe every week, usually somewhere south of the office. I find I think better when I'm not in the building. A brief pause. I was not expecting to spend the morning listening to someone dismantle our throughput problem from a corner table. Zara sat with the card in her hand. She thought about Mrs. Weston's laptop, carried up 2 flights of stairs and back down every night for 3 weeks. She thought about the library printer and the cost per page and the decision, twice, to reprint a section when she found an error rather than present something she knew was wrong. She thought about the rain on the second trip to Hilliard. She thought about the 17-minute delay and the workers whose records showed them failing a standard built on data that was measuring the wrong thing, and the quiet, controlled fury she had felt when she understood what the reports were actually saying and what the reports were being used to conclude. She thought about being awake for 22 hours. She looked up. What happens now? She said. Diane Ashworth's expression did not soften exactly, but something in it became less formal. Now you go to the interview. You walk in and you say the one sentence. You say the number. You wait for their questions, and you answer them the same way you've been answering mine, without the pause before the parts you're still not completely sure you're allowed to say. She held Zara's gaze. Because you are allowed to say them. That's what the data is for. Someone will ask about the degree. Yes. What do I say? Diane Ashworth looked at her for a long moment across the small table with its empty water glass and its faded highlighter and its 22 pages that had required everything Zara Coleman had to produce. You say that the analysis was built on 2 years of floor experience, 8 months as a supervising lead, 6 weeks of field research including 2 facility visits, and validated historical data that you rebuilt hour by hour from summary reports. A pause. You say that the findings don't become less accurate because of the institution that issued your enrollment record. Then you look them in the eye, and you let them decide what to do with that. And if they decide the transcript matters more than the $800,000, she paused. You take your analysis to the next company. Zara looked at the card in her hand. You won't be in the room, she said. It wasn't a question. I'll be in the building. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. Diane picked up her coffee. And you don't want me in the room. Why not? Because if I'm in the room, every question they ask you will be filtered through what they think I think of you. Right now they don't know we spoke. They'll have to evaluate what's actually sitting in front of them. She glanced at the pages on the table, which is, I can tell you, more than enough. Zara began gathering the pages back into their original order. Section 1, Section 2, the routing model, the staffing analysis, pages 11 through 14, the realignment proposal with the 3 scenarios, the conclusion with the conservative estimate and the aggressive estimate. She straightened the stack. She placed Diane Ashworth's card inside the front cover of the folder. She stood. She looked at the woman who had been a stranger for the first 22 minutes and had been something else for the 43 minutes after that. "I've been awake for 22 hours, she said. Diane Ashworth looked at her. "I know." "How?" "You've been refilling the same water bottle at the counter. You had the pages memorized by the time I started asking questions, which means you've been over them enough times that they're past rehearsal and into something else. And," a pause, "you have the specific look of someone who spent the night with a problem they couldn't put down." Zara almost smiled. "Is that a diagnostic skill or a CEO skill?" "They're the same skill usually." Diane closed her laptop. "Drink something other than water before 11 o'clock. "I can't." Zara stopped. Diane Ashworth was already signaling Ben at the counter. "Whatever she wants," she said. "Put it on my tab." Zara stood at the table with her folder and her water bottle and the business card of the person who had just bought her coffee, and she experienced the very specific sensation of not knowing quite how to hold the last hour of her life. "Thank you," she said. Diane Ashworth was already looking at her laptop screen. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Go prove I was right." The Crestline Solutions offices occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a building on North High Street in downtown Columbus. Zara arrived at 10:47. The lobby security desk checked her name against the visitor list and issued her a badge. The elevator ride to 14 was 31 seconds. She counted, not because she needed to, but because her hands needed something to do other than grip the folder. She was not thinking about Diane Ashworth. She was thinking about one sentence. The outbound sorting bottleneck is a routing problem, not a workforce problem, and fixing it doesn't require additional staff. It requires a 90-minute schedule adjustment. She said it to herself twice in the elevator, without the pause, without the rush through the numbers, the way she had said it to a woman in a cafe 2 hours ago, when the woman had made her say it until it sounded like something she actually believed because she actually believed it. The panel room on the 14th floor held 2 people. Graham Price, who led regional operations, a man in his mid-40s who wore the expression of someone permanently engaged in a calculation, and Priya Nair, from strategic development, who was younger than Zara had expected, and who had the particular alertness of someone who read everything twice. They apologized for the condensed schedule. Zara told them she understood. They gestured toward the presentation screen on the far wall. Zara did not connect her laptop. She stood at the front of the room. She said the sentence. Then she said the number. Then she was quiet. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds, which is, in a presentation room, a very long time. Priya Nair leaned forward. 800,000 annually. That's your conservative number? Based on 6 weeks of validated throughput data, if volume projections for the next quarter hold, which the current contract pipeline suggests they will, it approaches 1.2 million. Graham Price looked at his copy of her submission. He had clearly read it. The pages were marked, tabbed in 2 places, a few lines underlined in pencil. "You visited the Hilliard facility. Twice. We didn't arrange that access." "No." He looked up. "How did you get it?" "I introduced myself to the third shift supervisor and explained what I was trying to understand. He let me observe the outbound floor for 2 hours each visit." Graham and Priya exchanged a look. Zara had learned, in 2 years on warehouse floors, to pay attention to the looks that people didn't intend to be visible. This one said something had shifted in the room. Not dramatically, but definitely. "Your academic background," Priya said, her voice careful but not unkind. "Columbus community." "Yes." "Part-time enrollment." "Yes. I work the night shift at a fulfillment warehouse on the east side. Third shift receiving supervisor for the last 8 months. That experience is in your application." "Yes. But this analysis," Graham gestured at the pages in front of him, "the level of this is more than we typically see from someone without a 4-year degree." Zara said it evenly. Not defensively, not aggressively. Graham paused. "From someone at this stage of their career." "Yes. The analysis was built on 2 years of floor experience, 8 months as a supervising lead, 6 weeks of field research including 2 visits to the Hilliard facility, and historical throughput data that I rebuilt hour by hour from the summary reports you provided." She held his gaze. The findings don't become less accurate because of the institution that issued my enrollment record. If the routing model is wrong, the data will show it. If it's right, she did not pause, not even slightly. Then the question of where I went to school is the wrong question. Priya wrote something on her notepad. Graham looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Walk me through the 90-minute window, in detail." She walked him through it. Priya asked about the 3-scenario model. Zara explained each scenario. Graham asked about the implementation timeline. She gave him 3 phases, with realistic estimates. Priya asked what the primary implementation risk was. Zara said, "Worker resistance if the schedule adjustment is presented as a management correction rather than an operational improvement, so the framing matters as much as the change." Graham asked whether she had factored in seasonal volume variance. She had. The number held across all 4 quarters, though the corridor conflict was most acute in Q4. The 4 minutes became 26. When it was over, Graham Price closed the folder and looked at Priya. Then he looked at Zara. "We'll be in touch by end of week," he said. It was not a yes, it was not a no. It was the sound of a decision not yet made but already leaning. Zara thanked them. She picked up her folder. She walked out of the room and down the corridor and into the elevator with her folder pressed against her side and the business card of the CEO still tucked inside the front cover, and she pressed the lobby button, and the doors closed, and she stood in the elevator in silence all the way down. The elevator opened on the 14th floor lobby. Diane Ashworth was standing near the window, looking at her phone. She was still in the same blazer. She had not gone up to her office. She had been in the building, as she had said, and apparently in this specific part of it. She looked up when the elevator opened. Zara stopped. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough." Diane put her phone away. "Well?" They extended it to 26 minutes. Something moved across Diane Ashworth's face. Not surprise. The expression of a person who expected a thing to happen and is experiencing the specific, private satisfaction of being right. "The routing window," she said. He walked through the whole model, all 3 scenarios. He asked about Q4 seasonal variance. Diane nodded. "You'll hear from them before Friday. You know that, or you're predicting it. I know the way Graham Price asks questions. When he's going through the motions, he stays on the prepared list. When something has his attention, he goes off it." A pause. He went off it 20 minutes in. Zara stood in the lobby with her folder and said the next thing that was in her mind. "Were you going to tell me who you were?" "If I hadn't asked when I did." Diane was quiet for a moment. "I was deciding." "What were you deciding?" "Whether knowing would help you or hurt you. I thought there was a reasonable chance it would lock you up, make you perform for me instead of just explaining what you found." She met Zara's eyes. "I was wrong to withhold it as long as I did. It didn't lock me up." "No." A pause. "You're more comfortable with discomfort than most people I've hired with twice your experience." Zara looked at her. "That's not a compliment. That's just what it takes." Diane Ashworth looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "it is." They stood in the 14th floor lobby while the building moved around them. Elevators opening and closing, people crossing the corridor with coffees and folders. The ordinary business of a company at work. "If I get this position," Zara said, "I need you to understand something." Diane waited. "What happened in that cafe this morning isn't a story about you discovering me. There are people who could do this work, who have done work like this, who are doing it right now, who never get this meeting, because they don't happen to be rehearsing at the table next to the right person. The analysis doesn't get better because you were there. The corridor conflict doesn't get fixed faster because you bought me a coffee." She looked at Diane steadily. "The only thing that changes if you were there is the outcome for me specifically, not for the next person." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something being received. "I know that," Diane said. "Then if I'm in that program, I want to work on how you find the next person, the one who isn't rehearsing at the right table." Diane Ashworth looked at Zara Coleman for a long moment. "If you're in that program," she said, "that's a conversation I would like to have." The offer came on a Thursday afternoon. Graham Price called. Not Lauren from HR. Graham Price, head of regional operations, calling from his personal office line. He told her the panel had reviewed her submission, had cross-referenced the routing model with Crestline's proprietary volume data from the prior 2 years, and that the model held. He told her the corridor conflict was real, the timeline was actionable, and that the operations team wanted to bring her in. He did not mention Diane Ashworth. He did not need to. Zara said yes. She called her mother first, then Mrs. Weston, who cried in the specific way of someone who has been hoping for this for a long time and is relieved to stop. Then she carried the laptop carefully back up the stairs because she'd borrowed it one more time to write the acceptance email, and she carried it back down again after. She started the following Monday. In her first week, she met her cohort, 6 other analysts, all sharp, all different, all brought in through a process that had evaluated them on various combinations of education, experience, and abstract assessment metrics that she was already thinking about differently than she had been 3 months ago. She also met with Diane Ashworth, a brief meeting, 15 minutes, scheduled through Claire, Diane's assistant, who was extremely organized and had a manner that suggested she had been to the eye of many storms and found them generally manageable. Diane asked one question to open the meeting. "What's your first project?" Zara placed a single-page document on the desk between them. A revised intake process for the analyst program. "I want to remove the degree requirement from the first screening round and replace it with a skills assessment built around real operational problems." She paused. Problems that require the ability to read a system from the inside. The kind of problems you can learn on a warehouse floor. Diane read the document. She looked up. "Send it to HR this afternoon," she said. The Meridian Cup Café is still there, on the south side of Columbus, with its espresso machine that runs in confident short bursts, and its patient barista named Ben, and its corner table that catches the morning light between 7:30 and 9 before the angle shifts and the light moves to the window side. Some mornings, someone sits at that table with printed pages and a highlighter and rehearses something important under their breath, just quietly enough that the cafe absorbs the sound without anyone noticing. And some mornings, someone notices. What happens after that? Whether the noticing leads somewhere, whether the person in the corner is paying the right kind of attention, whether the right question gets asked at the right moment, none of that is guaranteed. None of it should have to be. Zara Coleman knew that better than anyone. She had said it to Diane Ashworth in the 14th floor lobby, and she had meant it in the exact way she said it. The analysis didn't improve because of who was listening. The corridor conflict didn't become real because a CEO happened to sit nearby. The data was the data. The flaw was the flaw. The 17-minute delay was real at 7:30 in the morning, and it was still real at noon, and it would have been real at midnight, and it would have kept being real whether or not anyone with the authority to fix it was ever in the same room as the person who had found it. That's what Zara understood about systems. They don't wait for the right audience. They just run. And the people inside them, the workers whose performance flags were attached to corridor conflicts they didn't create, the supervisors tracking numbers that were measuring the wrong thing, the analysts submitting summary reports that looked clean because the detail that would make them look dirty was hidden in an hour-by-hour breakdown that nobody had time to build. Those people kept showing up every shift, doing the work, inside a system that had quietly arranged to blame them for its own design failures. Zara knew something about that too. She had known it before she ever sat down at the corner table. The cafe still serves coffee, the corner table is still there. And somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, a revised intake process is now in use at one company, built by a 23-year-old who walked 40 minutes in the rain, twice, to understand a problem that everyone else had already decided they understood. The next person doesn't have to rehearse at the right table. That's the point. That was always the point. If this story reached something real in you today, if it made you think about a moment you were underestimated, or a time you saw something clearly that nobody was asking you to see, or work you did that cost you everything you had and that never quite reached the room it deserved to reach, then this story did exactly what it was here to do. Hit the like button, 1 second, right now. It costs you nothing, and it tells us that you were here, that this story found you, and that it mattered. Subscribe to American Truth Tales. We are here every single week, with the stories that should be front-page news and somehow never are. The ones about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, quietly, in borrowed blazers, on library printers, at 7:40 in the morning, in cafes where the water is free if you ask the right barista. Leave a comment. I want to know which moment landed hardest for you. And if you know someone who needs this story today, someone who is doing serious work that nobody is seeing, someone who is preparing something important in a corner somewhere, hoping someone pays attention, share this video with them. Because the work was always real. The corridor conflict was always real. The numbers were always right. Sometimes all it takes is one person who knows how to listen. Thank you for being that person today. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. We'll see you in the next one.